Just like web applications, Metro style apps support the standard navigation techniques that you'd use in a web application. Like an anchor tag and an iframe tag, these elements provide the functionality. Metro style apps also provide new navigation features, and this imposes restrictions that are designed to protect your applications. We'll start by investigating HTML style navigation, which does work. It's just not completely appropriate for the kinds of applications you'll want to build to represent Metro style applications. If you want to link to an internal page, you can certainly just add an anchor tag to a page. Assuming that page2.html exists, you could have a link like this. It would just go to page 2, and I promise it will work, and we'll do a demonstration of it in just a moment. It adds a relative link. It assumes that page2.html is in the same application, so it can find where that page lives. As a matter of fact, this assumes that page2.html is at the same hierarchical location as the current page. You do have options when specifying a path name. You can specify just the file name, assuming that the HTML file is in the current folder. Or you can also use a full packaged content URL scheme to specify a path. The ms-appx:/URL scheme allows you to indicate that you're looking within a different package, given a package name, for a specific file path. Notice the 2 slashes in front of the package name and the 1 slash in front of the file path. You can omit the package name if the file path happens to be in the same project, and you'll end up with an expression that looks something like this: ms-appx:// for the package name, then a slash for the file path. And that reference might look something like this. Of course, that's a little bit redundant because we're not specifying the package name, so why bother with the URL scheme? But it does at least prove the point and show how you can use this. Now, one important trick: you don't want to navigate away from your main page. Metro apps provide no built-in navigation support. There's no way to navigate back to the previous page without writing some code to make it happen. You'll have to add that support manually. So rather than navigating away from the main page, which really just isn't a good idea, you might want to use an iframe element and set the target to that new page to appear within that iframe. Now we can also use page controls, a new feature which we'll cover later in this section. Now I will point out that if you're referring to external content, for example a public web page, the application thinks, correctly, that the external content isn't part of the application, and it won't let you navigate back from an external URL to an internal page. Once you're out of your application, you're out. You can modify the manifest for your project to indicate external web-based content. In this case, it should be treated like internal content. If you examine the manifest, you'll see that you can do this. I've created a new blank project using HTML5 and JavaScript, and the first thing I'd like to do in default.html is change from dark to the light template because it works better for this particular application. The first thing I'm going to do after that is add a new page. So let's go to the project, right-click, choose Add New Item. I'll choose an HTML page, and I'll call it Page 2. Click Add, and it adds a new page to my project. Let me modify the content of Page 2 just so we can see what's there. And I'll just put Page 2, so when it comes up, we'll know it's up. Let me do it again, adding a third page. Again, an HTML page. I'll call it Page 3. And again, in the body, I'll just add a header so we know we're on Page 3. I'll save everything. Now back in default.html, let's add some links to get to those pages. And rather than watching me type this, I will go and steal this from my code snippet page. There we are. we have two links which will take us to page 2 and to page 3. Let's save it and run it. There's our page, there's our links. Let's click one, go to page 2. Well, looks like it works. Can I go back? I'll press the left arrow, backspace, home. Nothing in the UI allows me to go back. I'm stuck. End of story, I'm here. But if this is your intention, it seems to work fine. If I go back and try it again, and stop debugging, and run it again, and of course, I can go to page 3, and again it works, but I can't get back no matter what I do. Let's prove another point by adding in the full URL scheme to refer to this page. To do that, I would need to add ms-appx:/whack for my internal page. Of course, it's overkill, but it should prove that the URL scheme at least works. I'll press F5 to run this. Click on the link, and there I am at page 2. Of course, it works just the same as it did before. Unfortunately, we're navigating away from the main page, and we'd like to avoid that. So to get around that, we can add a target frame here. So let me go get the markup for that, and that will be an iframe here. And we'll paste it in. And now I'd like to make the target for each of these pages be that iframe. And rather than type it, I'll just go copy the code. Here it is. There we are. We've set the target attribute for each one of these references to be that target frame here. All right, well, let's try that. And that seems to work fine. Now, we don't have any sort of navigation history, no call stack. We have no way to get back and forth. All we can do is click on various links, and if that's what you want, this works fine. Simplest way to do it, couldn't complain, and it certainly works like any other Metro-style app except for the lack of page navigation history. And once we start using page controls, we get that and a lot more features. If you think about how websites are built, every website provides some sort of navigation. Normally, that's done using hyperlinks. Each page has its own JavaScript functions and data, and each page has its own HTML and style information. This is known as MultiPage Navigation, and you saw it in the previous example when we went from the default page to page 2, or the default page to page 3. That was MultiPage Navigation. As an alternative, you can use a single page, and you load content into that page as necessary. You can use iframe, as you saw in that last example, to load entire pages into that target frame. You can load pages into some sort of container in Metro-style apps using page controls. Either way, you're loading content into the main page, and that's a good goal to succeed at when building Metro-style applications. If you use single-page navigation, because that main page is never unloaded, its scripts are never unloaded. Its JavaScript code stays in memory and it's active. That makes it easier to manage state, transitions, and animations between loading pages into some container. Microsoft recommends this single-page navigation model for building Metro-style applications. Now, you've already seen how to build a single-page navigation model using an iframe. The page control is simply HTML code defined in a separate file that you load and display in a host page. So when you add a page control to your project, it's really just an HTML page. It's just got some special features added by the navigation framework that's built into the navigation template in Visual Studio. It's not the same as an iframe, however. An iframe isolates content, it's not part of the host page's DOM, and scripts are specific to content within the iframe. Instead, using page controls, you merge content with the host page's DOM. That's a good thing. That means you can, from within the page control, access content on the main page, and even better yet, from the main page, you can access content inside the page control. That means it has access to all the same scripts and styles as the host page. And it can participate easier in the host page's layout. Now, I will tell you that this has maybe a downside, and that is if your page control uses a specific style sheet that is radically different than the host pages, when you load the page control, it will take over. It will take over the main page's style sheet. We'll see an example of this. This isn't a bug, it is the intended behavior. You just have to be aware of it. Page controls load and run faster than content in an iframe, and for best results, use page controls rather than an iframe for single page navigation. You'll be happier with the results in the long run. The Win.js library, that is the Windows library for JavaScript, contains functions that help use fragments. Fragments are bits of pages you load into a container in the win.js.ui.fragments namespace. It's somewhat complicated managing the fragments. The navigation application template creates a high-level wrapper called a page control. If you use a fragment, you have to know to clone it, then add it as a child, and it gets to be kind of complicated managing all the details. The page control hides most of those details from you in a slightly higher level wrapper, making it very easy for you to implement navigation between pages in your applications. These page controls are built on top of the built-in fragment loader, and they provide a well-defined creation lifecycle, a well-defined scope for data, automatic activation of Win.js controls so you don't need to call process all yourself when you load the page control. It handles automatic parenting of content to the DOM, so once you load a page control, its contents are available in the document object model of the parent. And it adds a simple API. In order to make use of this, you'll really want to use the navigation project template, not the blank project template that we've been using. This encapsulates all of the information you need in a JavaScript file called navigator.js that adds all the top-level navigation for you. The page control is built as a custom Win.js control named Page Control Navigator, but that's generally handled for you when you add a new page control to your application. Let's start by looking at a very simple example using a page control. In Visual Studio, I'll create a new project, but this time I'll make sure and choose the navigation application template, and I'll call this Chapter 3 Demo 2. This creates a very simple application, and if I look in the HTML folder, I'll find homepage.html. That's a page control, and if you look at it, there's not very much here. We will find here a title. We'll find references to the same JavaScript and style sheets we saw before. We'll see some local references as well, and stuff that will be displayed. In homepage.html, we'll find a div whose class is a fragment homepage. It has a header and a section. These are elements that describe usage as opposed to layout here. And within those, we do have some accessibility information by default and a role, which indicates what the role of the section is. Inside that section, we have a button with the class WinBack button, which should look familiar. We've seen that already, and that displays the round button with the arrow in it. It's currently disabled, and it turns out that style, the WinBack button class style, when disabled, is invisible, so we won't actually see it until that becomes enabled. We have a header 1, and it's got a class assigned to it, and it has the class WinType ellipsis assigned to it. So if the title is too long, it gets 3 dots at the end. That's part of, again, the built-in style sheet. We have a span with the class page title, and it has the welcome in there. Then we have a section where we have just content. So there's really nothing in here at this point. If we look in default.html, we'll find a div labeled content host, which has a data win control of type page control navigator. Notice that it's given a namespace matching the name of this application, because that JavaScript is here in this application, and there's a namespace defined for chapter 3 demo 2, which is what I called this thing, and there is a class called page control navigator defined here. So it's all held together by locally defined code. There are some options here. For example, the home attribute indicates what is the home page for this page control navigator. What page will show up by default when we first load this page. And we'll see HTML/homepage.html. This page will appear within that navigator. Now here I also want to add a little bit of markup so we can see what's in the main page as opposed to within the page control. So let me add here at h1, this is the default.html content, so we can see what's coming from what. Let's save this and run it. Well, there you go. We get this coming from default.html and this stuff coming from that homepage.html in the page control that appears within it. Let's go look again. As you can see, there's a div named content host containing a page control navigator with its home property set to homepage.html. It automatically loads homepage.html, which has some very simple content in it by default. It's also worth noticing what happens in homepage.js. In homepage.js, that is the JavaScript associated with homepage.html, there is a function already defined. Here we see the define method of winjs.ui.pages called automatically when this page gets loaded. It has here the HTML location of the page and a definition for a function called ready. This is exposed to the public. This is the internal function ready here. The page navigation framework will call that ready function, which we're exposing in the define method, to the public. Obviously, this could be called anything we want as long as it matches up with this name here. It indicates what function internally should be called when the page navigation framework calls the ready method of this page control. And this allows us to initialize the fragment. We could put code here to get things started for this page when it initializes. I'm going to add another page control now to do some investigation. So let me come here to the HTML folder, right-click, choose Add, New Item, and choose Page Control. And I'll call this Page 2. So now I have another page control, and to keep things organized, I'm going to move the CSS into the CSS folder and the JavaScript into the JS folder. Now once I do that, I need to update the references here. They don't get updated automatically. And then here. And now I've modified these references so this page will look in the correct folder for its CSS and JavaScript. I'm going to change, just for fun, this style sheet to be the light style sheet. Now let's confirm that in homepage we were using the dark style sheet. Obviously I'm getting to a point here. In my page 2, I'd like to add a little bit of content here. So I'm going to go to my code snippet file, and get that content and place it here. And this content has a placeholder called time opened, which we'll fill in later on. It's going to say this page was ready at, indicating what time the page became ready for display. To make that happen, I'll go to page2.js and add a function. Let's go get the function so I don't have to type it. This is actually just a support function to verify that there's a leading 0 in front of times. There's nothing built in to make this happen, at least as far as I know, and so I needed to ensure when displaying minutes and seconds that we have a leading 0, because that's how we're used to looking at minutes and seconds displayed as part of a time. Now we need to, in the ready event handler here, add some code to initialize that placeholder. Let me go get that code. I'll actually replace the entire ready procedure. There we are. And here we'll get the element by ID named timeOpened and store it away. We'll get a new date. We'll get the hour portion of it. We'll get the minutes and seconds and make sure they have a 0 in front of them. And we'll calculate a string which holds the current time and store it into the time placeholder's inner text property. This will happen when the ready method gets called. Remember how this works. This code runs when this page loads, which defines the page and specifies its ready method. This is the public name, ready. This is the private name, which happens to be exactly the same thing. And if I wanted to change both of those, I could, so they match, but there's not really much point. This one also has an update layout placeholder. The update layout placeholder is meaningful if someone rotates a tablet device, for example. This method will get called when the navigation framework determines that the page layout has changed and you may need to update the display of this page control. We're not going to deal with that here, but you could put code there to handle that situation. In homepage.html, we need to add code to get us to page 2. So I'm going to go get a code snippet to make that happen. There we go. Let's neaten that up some. So now on homepage.html, we'll have a link which will take us to page 2. Let's try it. Now, I'm hoping you're thinking, well, that's a link. Isn't that just going to load the whole page? Not as a page control, but just as a page? And you're right, that's what it's going to do. We haven't quite solved the entire problem yet, but I am going to show you how, by using a page control, you get built-in support for navigation and the ready method gets run. So here, if I click that link, this is homepage.html. If I click that link, I do go to page 2, and we do see the time has been updated. The page was ready at the time it became ready. A couple things happened. First of all, page 2 took over the entire display because, well, we used an anchor tag, and that just takes you to the page. There's nothing that tells it to fill in that page control space. We have to work that out. And in addition, notice that the style of the application changed. That would be jarring for your users. My point is that when you change the style sheet in a child page, it changes it for the whole app. Well, I didn't really prove that yet because we didn't display page 2 as a child of default.html, which we will. But you have seen that it does respect that style sheet and it appears using the light style.